Let me introduce my colleague Chris Langdon. I'm Nick Gowing. We're both in London. Sorry, we can't join you wherever you are, but this is a wonderful way of connecting. And what we've been invited to do for this curated bureaucracy is to work out with you how to think the unthinkable. And there it is over my left shoulder, thinking the unthinkable. Because if you're going as particularly as bureaucrats, if that's what you like to call yourselves, if you're really going to engage and grip the enormity of what is happening, then that's what we'd like to encourage you to do over the next 55 minutes, Chris and I. I'm Nick Gowing, and I founded this project 6 years ago when Russia was doing dreadful things in Ukraine, and Crimea was taken by Russia as well. We've been through the migration crisis and so many other things. We could see that something big was happening, a new normal. And now we've had COVID. Chris, introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Chris Langdon. I'm the co-author with Nick of our book, Thinking the Unthinkable. And we've been trying to help leaders over the last 5 years cope with radical uncertainty. And obviously no time has been more radical and uncertain at the moment. So we're here to set out a few ideas, bring in a few friends, and to hear from you about the way you believe it's possible to lead in these incredibly difficult times.
Let's start off though, because we want this to be a workshop and a conversation, and we'd like you to feel that you can join in at any point. Chris and I will give some opening remarks, but before we get going, let's just test what you're thinking about leadership at the moment. So easy to use that one collective noun, leadership. Leadership in so many different forms, whether political or corporate, local government, national government, regional government, whether you're in a federal system, whether you're in a more authoritarian state. But can we just test you now to see what your thinking is? And we'll come back just at 5 to the hour with what you're thinking then at the end of the discussion. Question, how confident are you that leaders can handle the current level of disruption? How confident are you that leaders can handle the current and future levels of disruption? There it is. So if you're very confident, put in 1. If you're really least confident, put in 5. Actually, I might do that the other way around. Let me change that. 1, you are least confident. 5, you are most confident, or somewhere in the middle. And quite often during these discussions, the view shifts. So 1, you're the least confident that leaders can handle current and future levels of disruption. And 5, you are pretty confident, very confident that leaders are doing pretty well now, not just because of COVID, but with the climate emergency and so on. Let Chris and we'd like to hear from you using your chat line, using Q&A. We'd like to input your view as well into this, because this is designed as a brainstorming. Maybe leadership is doing pretty well. Maybe leadership is doing even worse than the perceptions. So let Chris and I spend literally just a few minutes highlighting our work, which is that essentially leadership, even before COVID-19, was struggling with a new normal, struggling because actually the systems in place did not allow the visionary nature that is needed to understand the enormity of what is happening. And that goes back 5 or 6 years to what Russia has been doing, to what China has been doing, and of course what countries like Brazil have been doing, and also in Eastern Europe, with the way Hungary and Poland have been moving in a very different nationalistic direction. But how many people, particularly those of you in government, whether national or regional or local government, really were prepared to see the enormity of this new normal, how ill-defined it was? And what we've been trying to encourage is leaders to think in a different way. Let me tell you our main finding, based on hundreds and hundreds of interviews over the last 6 years, and including things which are still happening now. The conformity which qualifies leaders for the top, in many ways now disqualifies them from appreciating the scale of disruption, the enormity of change, and then what on earth to do about it. Now, we were saying that was our conclusion a couple of years ago when we were publishing our first main work. But look where we are now with COVID-19. The number of leaders who weren't even prepared to listen to the risk register warnings that a pandemic was not just something which was possibly going to happen, but would definitely happen at some point. Therefore, it's not just thinking the unthinkable, it's also thinking the unpalatable, because the evidence is there, but how much do people take notice of it? Chris, why don't you pick up on the kind of theme we want to develop, which is how well are you doing?
Well, we're
how
very
innovative
interested.
are you? How transformative are you, Chris? Sorry.
Well, we're very interested to hear examples, and that's what we've done in our book, of leaders who are leading well. We all know it's incredibly difficult at the best of times, and we're not in the best of times, to lead. So one of the key strands, we have a number of case studies from Morocco through to Norway to Singapore, and looking at how it is one leads. And we're very interested, as part of the discussion we have until 5 to the hour, to hear examples of leadership that you are either doing or you're aware of examples of how best to cope in a world of COVID uncertainty, economic uncertainty, not to mention the climate emergency.
We're not being critical of leaders at all. We're trying to empower and embolden them, but there are certain new realities. The need for transformation means shedding a kind of orthodoxy. Zombie orthodoxies is the way we've crystallized it. And what we're seeing, the core reality, is that many systems of government don't allow the radical thinking. Easy for us to say, but mavericks are not normally welcome in government. Political leaders like to do things according to the agenda that they've got, but you need mavericks inside, or should they be called visionaries? Maverick tends to be a bit disparaging. Visionary should be very encouraging. And many have voiced to us in government their ability, how their ability to think differently, how their ability to think bravely in unthinkable ways has really been discouraged and stifled by these zombie orthodoxies, that conformity. Now, you may take exception to that, but that's our finding. And many people have turned to us now, 7 or 8 months into COVID, and said to us, well, we were pretty sniffy about what you were saying before COVID. Now we understand. And finally, Chris, let's just give a reminder, a kind of reality check of our research and our work over the last 6 years. In June 2016, on the front cover of the Journal of Chatham House, the Royal Institute for International Affairs, we talked of the real crisis of leadership. We talked about how Brexit was likely to be voted for 23 days later. We talked about how Trump was likely to be nominated and be elected as President of the United States. But most people wondered what we were smoking. And now here in the United Kingdom, we've had David Cameron, the Prime Minister at the time, admitting in his memoirs last year, I'm sorry, I failed. In other words, not reading the evidence, not seeing the enormity of what is happening, as so much of the stability that we've taken for granted over the last 75 years, 50 years, 30 years is unraveling, including in the European Union, including in many international treaties, including in so much we take for granted, not just globalization, but look at what's happening with the unpicking of the US-China relationship and so on. But that is on top of everything else that we're warning about. Now, Chris, do we already have people who want to talk?
Yes, I've just sent a message to Ramon and to ask whether you'd like to comment. You have an extraordinary background in city networking, working with ports and in placemaking. Would you like to sort of help us get the discussion going and just give us your sense of good examples of creative leadership? Please go ahead.
Ramon, we can see you. Welcome. Hello.
Great to see you.
Where are you? Go ahead.
I'm currently in Berlin as well, but I'm based in Valencia.
Go ahead.
I'm just wondering who has to take the lead in moments as uncertain as this one. It's about redistributing leadership. It's about finding new people that is going to take the lead. It's about the same ones that normally take the lead. How do we deal with that?
Do you have any ideas yourself?
I do have the feeling that moments like that, they can act both as a shaker and as an amplifier, no? So sometimes are just like showing what does work and what doesn't work, but at the same time, then can also create the conditions for some changes that were lurking somewhere to actually happen.
Chris, do we have anyone else lined up? Because we can answer that.
I think Harm Christian, you'd like to come in, is that
All
right?
Well, let's just answer you quickly, Ramon.
Thank you, Ramon.
Yeah. Those who are thinking more broadly more ambitiously, in a more visionary way. Have you thought, Mr. Prime Minister, have you thought, Madam Minister, about this? Quite often they are oppressed and suppressed within systems. The institutions are becoming, if you like, more authoritarian. And we're quoting, look, I'm summarizing what many have told us within government, certainly, even within the corporate sector. It's not encouraged, particularly if you're lower down the tree, to come up with radical ideas, which are not radical, but maybe very pragmatic, even if you're an outlier. So it is really about understanding when you've got a ministry, or you've got a corporate structure, you've got people inside who are maybe understanding better what is happening than everything that you're hearing at the top. But too often they are literally suppressed and oppressed, and we've heard so many examples of that. So it's about empowering them. It's about allowing them to experiment safely. It's about allowing them their voice to be heard, and for their career not to be jeopardized because of it. Their career should be enhanced. Now, you may say easier said than done, but we've charted examples, particularly in our work, of how this has really worked, particularly for the next generation. We are talking about a systemic change here, which we'd like to encourage. This is not about a criticism. It's about saying new leadership and new leadership systems require a new way of doing things, which mean new structures, even understanding what in the corporate sector, the reason for a company is. The purpose is not just to make money, it's actually to feed back into the into the world in ways which are summarized as purpose. So I hope that gives a direction of travel for you, Ramon. Chris, who else we got?
Han Christian has just joined us. Would you like to unmute and put your video on as well, Han Christian? Hi, good to see you. Would you like to introduce yourself as well?
You're on mute, Chris.
But do unmute first.
And while Hum Christian is about to come on, do please come forward as soon as possible, so we know you want to say something.
Yes.
Or give us ideas, good examples. Hum Christian.
Great. Thank you. And sorry for the delay. Picking up on Ramon's perspective on redistributing leadership and also power, I think that it comes to my mind two perspectives. One is to work quite closely with politicians on both sides, because I think sometimes also having the opposition on the same side as we, or agreeing that we need radical new ideas and new thinking and that kind of, how should I say, space to try out new things, to have a broad acceptance within the political environment as well. I think it's important for the bureaucrats. So that would be one take on it. And a second take would also be that particularly, I don't know whether this comes along in all countries, but in Norway we have a very good collaboration with the unions as well within the public sector. So I'm also thinking that discussing the topic of creative bureaucracy with the unions in a more sort of structured way would also be one interesting way to go forward.
Christian, what do you do yourself?
I am Director General in the city of Bergen for culture, diversity and equality.
I was there a few months ago, so at the end of winter. But let me ask you, if I may, do you feel that every voice can be heard in your council in Bergen or not?
Yes, absolutely. I think so. I think that's one of the strengths with our city. Every voice can be heard, and the people living in the city are easily raise their voice. So I think there is a good climate for sharing ideas and raising your voice. Yes.
And public servants as well, if you're serving the government.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes.
Okay. Well, everyone should come to Bergen or to Norway, I think, because certainly the kind of conclusions and analysis that Chris and I have got is that's against the trend, particularly in many countries now. Norway has a certain way of doing things and always had, but in many other countries, sadly, including in the country I'm speaking from, the United Kingdom, there's a kind of, you either fit in or you get out. And that means that if you're worried about your pension, your children, your career and so on, it's not a comfortable situation to be in. There's a ruder way in which I could express that, which is well known to English speakers. But you're seeing that as well in countries which are becoming increasingly authoritarian, in places like in Eastern Europe. So, and I speak as someone who was in many of the revolutions like Chris in Eastern Europe, and there's a degree of shock at what is happening. And look, it's easy for us to say this, but when you look at what's happened, the defenestration of the US public service under Trump, where he essentially wanted to drain the swamp, and many jobs are simply not filled 3.5 years into his presidency. You're seeing this in many other places where public service is being politicized. You're either doing exactly what the minister wants, or you don't have a role. And if you're a public servant and you've signed up to serve any government or any government of any persuasion, that's very, very difficult. So I think you're very lucky to be where you are in Bergen. But sadly, I think the trend is not favorable. And that's why we accepted this invitation to encourage those who feel oppressed. And it's not a hard word, it is a hard word, but it's not too harsh a word. Those who feel oppressed to work out ways in which you can move it forward. And that's difficult. Chris, I think we've got other people who want to come in, so let's move on. Is that all right?
We're going to bring in Charles in a moment, but I notice we have a large majority of female participants, and we've been only blokes talking so far. So I wonder whether any of you, Adriana, Annette, Beatrice, Claudia, Jessica, Julie, Karin, Linda, or Thea would like to come in a moment. So
choose one,
balanced. And do we have Charles coming on?
Nominate at least one of those other wonderful names, because we need to hear from 2 or 3 of them. Can you nominate them? Then they'll come online.
Well, I didn't mention you. Would you,
Annette,
Stephanie,
Annette.
Would you like to come on? Oh, Adriana, great. And Annette as well, we see.
Adriana, would you like to come on? Unmute yourself and tell us where you're from and what you do.
Hi. Hello, good morning. My name is Adriana Almonacid. I'm from Colombia. And
Buenos dias.
yeah, so I think that in this particular moment in Colombia, we're living in, as you probably heard, we voted for peace a couple of years ago, and that led to strong polarization in the government. You know, people who are against the peace deal and people pro the peace deal, and that those strong positions about that have broken up the way that we interact with each other and also within the government. And so we're still some voices some people are avoiding talking about those core issues about how we see that the public administration should go, and not having those conversations is the same as quieting those voices. So I resonate very much with what you were saying and with the title of this webinar.
But can we just check with you, Annette, Adriana? And I have to say, I've been in Colombia in the darkest times as well. I won't go into details, but has there been a new kind of ventilation of the bureaucracy to understand that this is a new generation? This is potentially a new era of peace. When you look at Medellin and what's happening in places which you know far better than me, is there a sense of a big change which is being reflected in the psyche of the governance in your country, both locally and nationally?
Well, yes and no. I think that new leaderships are emerging, both in local governments, but then again, the strong polarization and the politicization of these two poles make it difficult to move forward and come to a middle term and get everyone's voice to be heard.
Can people speak openly in government where you are?
Well, I work in national government, and I actually in the national planning office, and I work with the team of innovation. So we are very lucky to be in a position, but we're in a very technical ministry, and our team actually has the authorization actually to bend a little the rules and speak up.
So you can be maverick and visionary at the same time.
Yes, a little bit, yes. We're lucky in that way. Thanks,
Adriana. Chris.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. So Annette, would you like to unmute yourself and to comment, please? And welcome, Charles. We see you with us as well.
Annette, where are you from? Annette, you're muted at the moment.
Hello?
Yes, hi, go ahead.
Hi. I'm from Germany. I'm from the Federal Foreign Office of Germany.
Are you in Berlin?
I'm based in Berlin, yes. Yeah, very interesting. And I think our government is quite eager to learn from the Corona crisis and the new ways of working that have opened up. But I think we should give a say to people also. You know, when I see how we build up, for instance, working groups who work on lessons learned, we tend to assemble always the same people, and we should try and give people that have never been heard before the way. We should try to open up channels for dissent, and give a say also to people who have never been able to contribute, because the working groups tend to always include kind of people on the leadership level and tend to be a little bit homogeneous at times. So we should also try and give a say to people that so far haven't been listened to enough.
Annette, you're speaking our language from the Auswärtiges Amt. We can see you now. Are you actually in your office at the moment or at home?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Now, look, this is not. We didn't know you were going to come on, and none of the interventions have been fixed in advance. But let me just share with you, because it is a story we tell as well more broadly. We were invited for Thinking the Unthinkable to come to the Auswärtiges Amt in May 2016 by Thomas Bagger, who was the head of policy planning at the time. He's now working for the presidency, for President Steinmeier. But he had a great phrase. He was trying to warn within the foreign ministry of an end to tranquility. I know this is a public event, but he's now written about it very publicly. But he brought us in to try and, within a place I remember for the old Communist Party headquarters, and I was there during the darkest times of 1989, the SED and so on. But he was making very clear, I'm frustrated that I can't get people to think radically, including about Russia, but particularly after Putin and what he'd done in Crimea and so on. And dare I say, a degree of conformity and sclerosis, even among the most senior figures, both political and also officials like at your level. Now, I'm not betraying any confidences. When I last saw him a year and a half ago, he was saying it was still quite difficult. And what is interesting is that, Annette, you have really confirmed exactly our very strong impression, and it really needs a much bigger conversation. Some off the record, some on the record, maybe, because it could be that we should come back, as we've done in the British Foreign Office, and encourage a kind of lateral thinking and look at what is happening now after the poisoning of Navalny, and Merkel is seeing Navalny in the Charité Hospital in Berlin today. The fact is that Nord Stream 2 is now under real threat because of something which could have been foreseen. Was it an unthinkable? Was it an unpalatable? But I'm really making this point that within the ministry, your ministry, already there was an awareness that this was an end to tranquility, as Thomas Bagger put it. But it took a long time for that really to get traction in ways which allowed people's careers to flourish, as opposed to feel they were marginalized. Now, you may think I'm being a bit unfair, and do come back, please, and we'll move on to maybe Beatrice. But do tell us if that's still the case. But I get the feeling from what you've just said, it could still be the case.
Yeah, I think hierarchies are still very strong, no? And I think it takes really maybe this kind of disruption that now has been provided by the COVID crisis to overcome this very hierarchical thinking, and also let people come in who so far maybe haven't had a say in how you build up new structures, new processes, which I think we need in order for our ministry to be ready for the future.
What was interesting, and maybe we need to move on, but maybe we can have an exchange about this afterwards, is that Mr. Bagger, Thomas Bagger, Dr. Bagger's successors didn't seem to be that interested in seeing a break with the way things needed to be thought about. Now, you can see this in many ministries, and I'm using this because I wouldn't use this example had you not come on the line. But I think it's emblematic of the kind of problem we're talking about. A sense of, is my career in doubt or in jeopardy? If I say, have you thought about what the impact would be of a Novichok poisoning and the implications for German foreign policy with Nord Stream 2, et cetera, et cetera? I think you see where we're coming from and what we've seen often in private conversations. But thank you, Annette. Maybe we can talk again.
And Beatrice, you're about to join us. So it's great to see you. Tell us where you're coming from, and do contribute. What's your thought on creative leadership across government organizations?
Hi, yeah, so I'm coming from the Philippines. I'm working in one of the think tanks one of the public sector think tanks for the Philippines. When it comes to creative thinking or creative leadership in the Philippines, there are so many dimensions to it. For one, there's the political aspect of it that, like in many countries, of course, many developing countries, and also with one that has experienced dictatorship just under 40 years ago, there's definitely still the political aspect of how many voices do we actually get to have at the table? How many, especially coming from the marginalized sectors, so like indigenous peoples, labor unions, the LGBT communities, they're not part of the discussions. And on the other side of it, there's, of course, within the bureaucracy itself, the organizations, we do have some movement, like there are organizations that are definitely interested in innovation, but whether or not it's the innovation that leads us to more radical or bigger picture or systemic changes leaves, I mean, there's still much to be done in that area.
How would you describe the culture of governance in the current system in the last 3 or 4 years, given the change of leadership?
In the last 3 or 4 years, so we've been under President Rodrigo Duterte succeeded President Noynoy Aquino in 2016, and since then, there are always going to be two phases of that. On one hand, you have, of course, the political aspect where obviously there have been some new policies that have curtailed a lot of our rights to express ourselves, to dissent, especially if you're, again, from the marginalized sectors, if you're from the more progressive wing of the country. But within, again, in the Philippines, like within the bureaucracy, there have been movements towards greater innovation. Innovation has become one of the key points of the government. But the question there is innovation for whom, and who gets to participate in that innovation?
Would you like to, before we move on, would you like to tell us one example of an innovation that's impressed you?
Mm-hmm. Well, lately, this is mostly in the local governments. They've been the ones who have been really driving the conversation on innovation. So, for example, in one of the major cities in the Philippines, so Makati City, they have this application that has all of these that streamlines a lot of public services, so people can access from their smartphones services like financial assistance. Scholars can go to a website that will tell them how to access their financial assistance, submit registration forms, and the same thing goes for business owners. And then it also disseminates public information. So those are really interesting. Or in Pasig City, another major city here in the Philippines, they have a smart public safety management system that integrates flood control, emergency response, even risk detection. So those are really interesting kinds of movements, but they're really led by local governments, which really have in the Philippines. They have a history of leading these kinds of bottom-up ideas.
Thank you. That's really interesting. So thank you very much for joining us. And now, if you're ready, Charles, if you'd like to unmute yourself and join the fray.
And then shall we go to Frederick after that?
Exactly.
Charles.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for doing all of what you're doing. I think the first thing I'd want to say, and we all know, this is the COVID is the first collective experience that nearly 8 billion people have had ever in anybody's lifetime. And so that has obviously shook up things. Secondly, I think what it's done, it has focused people on thinking about what really matters. And I think you've discussed that already, what really matters. Thirdly, it's given us a glimpse of potential futures in certain senses. This was initially the biggest experiment in climate change reduction ever, and shows what is possible, but it was a crisis that created it. You know, all the things about birds, hearing birds sing, clean air and so on. And what has also happened, there have been responses, but obviously related to COVID, and we are monitoring all those innovations that are occurring. The key question is, when you take a helicopter view of things, you can of course around the world see these new innovations, you can see other people struggling and doing things, interesting projects, they're pilot projects or whatever they are, and they're sometimes big real projects, but essentially they're fragments. They're fragments. And this question, I think, that you're addressing is, how do these fragments gather together that they're a force, a movement, a critical mass that actually shifts the change? Secondly, beyond that, is how would that change be embedded? Because many of the innovations that Oxy, for example, talks about, you know, will they fade away? Will actually structures change? Will people become more empowered? All of those things. So I just thought I'd put that into the conversation.
Thank you very much, Charles. And maybe we could bring in Frederick now from Sweden, and you describe yourself as an artistic bureaucrat, or one of your many hats you wear. What's your response to the points that Charles has made about how do we make stuff stick and create, first of all, creating the critical mass? What's your sense of that? From, you have multiple perspectives in Sweden, I can see. And
Frederick, what is an artistic bureaucrat?
Well, it's a former artist who tries to fit into a public authority, hired by the keywords, come in and be creative, come in and do things we didn't expect. And then you come in full of engagement, and then you understand that, well, this is not a theater stage, this is something else. So from that perspective, I'll try to connect artistic thinking and to see where are the connections with the bureaucratic thinking and the artistic thinking, which is there are similarities, but also, of course, a lot of things that are not equal at any time. So speaking about keeping momentum, which I could see that Charles was aiming at, I think that the relation between being a civil servant in a public authority with the political agenda is very important to understand that you are working on a political mandate, but in that you have to find the freedom or the access that you think is also suitable for your own self-esteem. So it's a tricky question to be a creative or an artistic bureaucrat. I would say it's not an easy task. So therefore, I would just like Beatrice was talking about this local government think tank. I think that is a model we don't have in Sweden, and it's an interesting way to work on.
But Frederick, do your fellow bureaucrats take you seriously as an artistic bureaucrat? Are you the, I'm being very simplistic here, but to make a very important point, because in some ways, I mean, Sweden has a certain way of doing things anyway, which is fantastic. But are you viewed as a maverick? Are you viewed as a visionary? Are you viewed as an extra asset, or someone to keep at arm's length? I ask it rhetorically because I have no idea what the answer is.
No, I would say you really coming with the royal straight flush there. It's a little bit of everything there. You can, if you come in and focus in that quite narrow way of addressing your own competence in a public authority, you will. The key thing is that you have to adjust. So being an artist, you can come in, you can sometimes play the role as the real formal bureaucrat. And sometimes you can take the other and act as a maverick, or you can act as a more constructive, so to say, more of a villain in the authority. So it depends on what kind of politicians you have. If you have politicians who like people who go outside the box and try to act not in a normal way, then it's good. But if you have politicians steering, they can look at you as maybe a bit dangerous sometimes, and maybe playing outside the arena.
But you use a very interesting word there, to act as a maverick. Now, maybe that's something in the language, but are you playing a role? Do you have different persona as an artistic bureaucrat? In other words, sometimes you're acting as an artist, sometimes you're acting as a bureaucrat. In other words, what's the real Fredrik? Are you an artist who's secretly becoming a bureaucrat, or a bureaucrat who really wants to be an artist? You see, maybe it's your use of the word acting which has got me there.
Yeah, and I would say I really love this discussion. It's a very rare discussion for me, and I really enjoy it. So thank you for bringing it up.
Well, we can have it.
We're going to continue this. We're going to continue this line of thinking, Fredrik, because we're going to bring in Rita now, who is from Ghent, who again is very much interested in the interaction of culture and politics. And I hope Margie will join us from Australia in a moment. But Rita, over to you. You've been hearing, I hope, what Fredrik is saying. You're very involved in cross-innovation and culture. So from your perspective, how do we create the critical mass for the sort of changes that we all aspire to?
And Fredrik,
your cultural connection.
Can we continue the conversation at some point? Because I'm intrigued.
Yes, definitely.
Sound okay?
Very good.
Okay, so to continue the situation, well, I actually wanted something to say about the evolution in leadership in, let's say, the Corona period, because mid-March, and it's perhaps interesting to say, I work as a senior policy advisor within the Ministry of Culture on the topic of culture and economy. And mid-March, during a meeting I was not part of, I was appointed to come with a plan to tackle the COVID-19 crisis for the cultural sector in Flanders. And what happened next can be compared with the following situation. In fact, I was on the deck of a big tanker and I needed to go into the opposite direction. So the only thing I could do is jump off, and I needed a life jacket, but there was none because I had to go in the opposite direction. Everyone on the deck shouted, watch out, you are going to drown, but the head of the department had confidence. And I jumped, and now it turns out that I didn't drown, I'm still here. Yes. And there is a plan to help surviving the cultural sector in Flanders. But yet at the same time, I'm very happy I survived, but the same people on the deck are still looking into the opposite direction, and now they still remind me of the fact that while searching, let's say, a plan to get out of the crisis, that I didn't follow the necessary procedures. So that is a bit of a description of what this bureaucracy is about. They allowed, let's say, a one-time innovation because it was necessary and no one had a clue what to do. But I don't think they realized that it was the moment of a big shift, a big change. So the question is, was I a one-day maverick, or will it be a permanent one? So
what's your message? What's your encouragement?
Jump. If you think it's necessary to jump, then you should do so, whatever the reaction might be, because you must have confidence that what you do is for the sector you're working for. And the worst thing that could happen is that a minister is not going to follow the advice. But if you put it, let's say, in a friendly way, and that they can make the choice, you see, they easily do so. But I understand that I'm in a very comfortable position being in Belgium, which is, in fact, when it comes to policy making, not a hostile environment. And I hear from other testimonies that this is not always the case. So perhaps I'm a bit spoiled on that topic.
And quickly, who creates that mood? Presumably you thought you were taking a risk, but who creates the right mood of allowing you to experiment safely?
I think I create the atmosphere by making the impossible possible using storytelling. I know exactly what I can say to a politician and what not, and what can be heard and what not, and how to put it in a different context. That creates also kind of safety for the ministers themselves, also for the head of departments, because they know that it will not be hostile takeover, which can be political, let's say, a bit tacky.
That's fantastic. I mean, I think we need to talk to you a little more about this, because not maybe now, because there are others who want to talk, but
yeah.
Getting ministers on side is so critical in all of this, because they can be deeply, deeply suppressive if the chemistry is not right. But Rita, that's fantastic.
Thank you.
And really, it's an eye opener, and it's heartening to hear that. Chris.
Yes, Margie, you're somebody who is, I think, known for your connected thinking. Would you like to unmute and join us? And then I know Ramon, you'd like to join in, and I'm sure Frederick, you may have some comments as well in a moment, but let's hear from Margie first. So you have the floor. Welcome.
Hi, can you hear me?
Perfectly.
I'm sorry. Sorry, it's late at night here in Adelaide, Australia, but look, I followed your work for a long time, and I've been incredibly interested in it, because I feel like you were sounding this warning many years ago. I think that the problem is, how do you transform an organisation? I mean, I don't work in government anymore. I worked in government for about 25 years or so. How do you transform an organisation in the way it needs to be transformed, while you're also having to keep it going? It has to keep consistently delivering and doing what it's been doing in a certain way for a long time. And I think it creates an incredible cognitive dissonance within organizations. It's people want to embrace new ways of working. They want to do things differently, but all of us are products of the system itself. And so it's incredibly challenging question to ask for government public services, for bureaucracies to take on. I find it very interesting, and I am constantly trying to understand or imagine what might be possible. But I must admit to also being a bit flummoxed about what the potentials are. So I could ask back to you, because both of you have been talking obviously to a lot of governments around the world, whether there are examples that you look to that you find inspiring.
You'll have your own view on this, Margie, and I was last in Adelaide a year ago. But Steve Marshall, your current Premier, is perhaps an interesting case in this. Most people won't know who we're talking about, but having met him on several occasions, he's taking calculated risks, both for the future of South Australia, Adelaide as well, putting Adelaide on the map, but also probably speaking his mind, even by Australian standards, in ways which are quite remarkable at times. And so I simply put that on. It could be he doesn't get re-elected because he's upset people locally and hasn't delivered. But I would suggest to you that he would be one example, homegrown for you, of how those at the top are prepared to take risks. And we've seen it. It's not just because he's a male, but when you see what's happening in New Zealand, what's happening in Estonia, what's happening in Finland, what's happening in Slovakia, the way women leaders have really gripped and thought about leadership in a different way, and are so far doing pretty well, even though the New Zealand elections had to be delayed a little bit. But I'm merely saying that Steve, I know him as Steve, could be one of those who is prepared to take it on the nose, but also challenge the certain orthodoxy in Australian politics. You'll have your own view, and tell me if you do have a different view. But it seems to me there's possibilities there anyway. Come back in.
Oh, look, I don't really want to comment. I think I don't know him at all. I think he comes across as quite an open political leader, but I think it's a bigger question that you're asking. I think you're asking, how do you take a bureaucracy of, in South Australia, it's more than 100,000 people on a journey where in fact they're trying to disrupt themselves. It's a lot bigger question than the political leader, because the political leaders, however well they do, are always here for a term of 4 years, 5 years, 3 years, depending on the system. And the bureaucracy is there for the longer term.
Yep.
But the bureaucracy has been, over the last 30 years, reduced in its capacity to take responsibility for thinking long term or thinking beyond the term of politicians. And so we've got a big challenge in reinvesting in thinking capabilities within public services. And that's the thing that I think it's difficult in many jurisdictions. We've whittled away the capacity of public services to think, to imagine, to be feeling free, to be able to do things in unconventional ways, as you've discussed. And we don't know how to reinsert it, because in a way they've become a bit Stockholm syndrome,
Yeah, I think that's, we can't linger for too long, Margie, but I think that's what I was getting at, that, I mean, he privately admitted to me, I mean, we're not buddies or anything, but he said, look, I've got a problem trying to take the public servants with me, because I'm here and I may be taken out and there'll be a successor premier. But on the other hand, I've got to motivate them, and maybe he's got a chance with trying to make Adelaide a new high-tech focus with the hospital development and so on. So, you can see, but then you have Kangaroo Island and you have the terrible fires and so on. And you had the massive power outage, which surprised everyone. Had it not been planned for, had it not been thought about, those kind of things can take down a premier and can take down political leaders in brutal ways. And public servants maybe should have been having that on the agenda as well. But I think you make some really important points there. But it'll be interesting to see how Steve Marshall gets on.
Sure. Thanks.
Thanks, Margie. Chris.
Ramon, would you like to unmute yourself?
Yes.
Please come on. And likewise, Frederick, if you'd like to come in a moment. But Ramon, please.
Yeah,
I know you wanted to comment on what has been said before.
Yeah, I'm enjoying the conversation so much, and I also like how you branded as thinking the unthinkable. But picking up the comment from Annette and Beatrice about inclusion, I think we have to admit that someone has to be thinking about that. Someone is thinking the unthinkable in some place. So it's about to be humble enough to listen. And I'm wondering as well if this COVID situation is changing something, because change is also it needs trial and error. And we very well know that within public sector, there is strong risk aversion. But there are some particular situations like COVID that then allow this humility to flourish, and people has a higher, like they are more open to listen. And maybe that also explains a bit why this female leadership is dealing with that better, with that situation better, And there are many examples of that. I think it's interesting enough, maybe with that situation, and because we are dealing with the unknown, actually, like some elements, some people within public sector can be empowered to try things that otherwise cannot be tried, And I'm just to connecting the dots. We are actually dealing with that in the session at 6 p.m. today in Offices for Change, where there will be some examples of living labs that are actually led by public sectors at the middle hierarchy, and not are like politicians that pushing those reforms, and suddenly the window is open, So yeah, I just to summarize, like somebody's already thinking the unthinkable in the organization. What happens if we are humble enough to listen?
And that's 6 p.m. Berlin time, is that right?
Yes.
Chris, do you want to underline the kind of work that we've been doing, the kind of enormous and rather bleak reality check on the future of COVID and the implications for all of us, and certainly for those who are running countries and corporates, about the reality of what lies ahead?
Well, we've got about four minutes left, but all I'd like to say, I think, is we're trying to understand, talking to epidemiologists and others, just how long do we need to plan? And our sense is we need to plan for a number of years, even if a vaccine is available, at least in small quantities from the end of this year. It's going to be a long time for the global rollout. So how we consider how we respond. That's just, I think, really in the time available, certainly our findings, and I see they're being confirmed now by a number of reports that have come out and by real experts on the subject, like Jeremy Farah from the Wellcome Trust in the last few days. So I think that's just that sense of how we plan for a really extended period of radical uncertainty and trying to comprehend what this new normal will be. It will be nothing like the world of February 2020. I think we're clear on that.
But it's not unthinkable. That's the main point for everyone. And that's what public servants and those in bureaucracies, I hate the word in some ways, they've got to rationalize that this is a new world we're talking about, a new world of adversity, of an imploding economy, of changing needs for skilling. It's a very different world, and it's nothing compared to what we're facing with the climate emergency. It is not unthinkable. It is wholly thinkable, however unpalatable it is at the same time.
Now, Frederick, I heard you nodding, and I think you'd like to come in, so please unmute yourself.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm nodding because I think when we come to this word, what's thinkable and unthinkable, one critical matter that a bureaucrat must have. I'm concerning myself as an actor acting like a bureaucrat, which is quite. It's an easy way to explain it. But we tried to start what we call a department of chaos, which would like be a part of the department that constantly created chaos, so the politicians could have something to dig from. It was a bit. Maybe out of the box, we didn't get the money for it, but we're still preparing for that. And that, I think, is a good way to be. And a creative bureaucrat needs also a department of chaos to really fulfill the dreams and ideas.
Why did you not get money for it?
Now, it was this was a European Union fund. I think it was 100 cities who applied for money, and the city of Umeå is I mean, it's a rich country and a rich municipality, but nevertheless, it created a political debate in the city. Some politicians said, we will never put money into a department of chaos, and others said, this sounds brilliant. So at least it created a discussion, and the last card isn't played here yet, but I think that the idea of trying to create chaos is something that we should do more often.
Quickly though, where is that? Is that a national department of chaos, or in your?
No, it doesn't exist.
Well, affiliated to a town?
Yeah, to our city. Yeah,
which city is
mainly
that?
To our city, Umeå in the north. Sorry, I represent a city called Umeå in the north of Sweden. It was European Capital of Culture 2014, and that was the main part. Yeah.
Just before I hand back to Chris, let's check on what your view is. The second version of the same question we asked at the beginning. Let me just put to you one thing which we make very clear in all our work. Language is important. If you talk about it as Department of Chaos, then probably no one wants to be involved in funding chaos. If you were to talk about it as the Department for Inspiration or New Ideas, it's conformist, but it's also giving a message of we want to think differently. Like Maverick, like Visionary, the same people, but if you call them Maverick, they're kind of outcasts. If they're visionaries, they've got a positive side. So just one word. Reapply and see if you can call it the Department for Inspiration. Chris.
And I think, having been a civil servant myself, there probably are lots of departments of chaos out there already. Now, Nick, have we done the poll? We ought to look at the results.
Well, we want to, Robin, can we just put up that question again and see if we can then make the comparison to see the poll size is not that big, but the sampling. But here we are again. Let's try and see if your views might have changed at all. How confident are you that leaders can handle current and future levels of disruption? 1, you don't think there's much chance of that at all, or 5, you're very confident. If you could just quickly do that before we wrap up within the next minute. And while that's coming through, Robin, are you able to show us the first result?
I think one at a time, possibly.
Yeah. Robin, help us understand. Can that happen?
I love the comment from Rita, understanding what happens outside government and how that's brought in, I think is really important.
All right. Well, look, this is just purely a sample at the moment. No one is that pessimistic. Very few of you are optimistic, but everyone's sitting on the hedge. I think we would say there's real opportunity. Therefore, 58% for moitié is probably a good reading of the way we feel. But we can feel things shifting through sessions like this. Can we look at the second one to see if there's a significant change at all, Robin? 58% was the key statistic there. Well, probably things seem to have got worse. Many of you have shifted towards the least confident side of it. I'm sorry if we've had a role in that, but we wanted to end this rather positively. But there you can see 58%. I mean, the numbers aren't that big anyway, but you can see a direction of travel there, which is more pessimistic than we might have expected. Chris, do you want to wind up?
And just to explain to Rita, I think as you're technically a panelist why you haven't been allowed to vote, it's nothing political at all. But thank you to Charles and to Robin from Creative Bureaucracy. We've really learned a lot from this conversation. It's been extremely interesting. We need to hand over now. I think there's going to be now an interview with Sonia Thurman from the Center for Social Innovation as a video interview. But thank you very much to all of you for taking part. Some really interesting comments, and I hope we can keep connected. And thank you to Lynn, who wants to buy our book. It's out there on Amazon, but we will continue taking part in the festival over this next few days and love to keep in touch. So thank you so much to all of you.
And the address is thinkunthink.org. We'd love to keep in touch, because actually people like you are the people who are giving us inspiration for the next stages of all our work. Thinkunthink, all one word, .org.
Thank you.
Bye from London. Bye.
Goodbye.